Nintendo's Amiibo figures look great as they are, but customizing is a way of making them even more special. I'm TJ, and it's my mission to make the map that removes the mystery from Amiibo to help you chart the course to conquer your favorite custom challenges and achieve the unique and personalized Amiibo you always wanted. Let me make the mistakes so you don't have to.
Adventure time! I'm bored already.
That's me, TJ, and Dark TJ. They'll be popping up from time to time to offer some tips, tricks, and helpful hints.
Don't listen to anything this guy has to say. He has no idea what he's doing.
Or not so helpful. It's dangerous to go alone, so come with us and we'll conquer this custom together. Welcome to Custom Conquest. Hey everybody, glad you made it. I'm really excited about this episode. It's the first of a 7-part series where we're going to transform a small army of Bowser Jr. into the Koopalings. A number of characters in Smash have alternate appearances that change their physical aspects beyond a simple palette swap, like changing their gender, the style of the clothes that they wear, or even a different character. But what makes the Bowser Jr. Amiibo especially unique is that it's the only one where every alternate is a different character altogether. If you've seen my other show, Me Be Me,
I love that show! Too bad you're gonna lose horribly.
Then you've probably noticed all 7 Koopalings are on the Team Shadow Legion. While each Amiibo is distinctly unique with respect to their training, custom moveset, and in-game appearance, keeping track of which one was what on the physical figure front became quite confusing quite quickly. I knew a Koopaling Custom Conquest was inevitable, but I also knew it would be a very involved undertaking. In this episode, I'm going to detail how I transformed a Bowser Jr. Amiibo into a Larry Koopa. But first, I want to provide a little clarification about how I approached this project. I began this mission with the foreknowledge that I would be completing all 7 Koopalings, and I worked on them simultaneously, which allowed me to pull resources, parts, and components from all the Amiibo involved. That means there may be times where I utilize pieces that come from more than one Bowser Jr. figure on a single Koopaling. But keep in mind there are always more than one way to overcome any obstacle. Some of them I'll detail here as we go, and some you'll discover on your own.
Maybe our players at home have some cool tricks for us.
For sure, always looking to expand my arsenal. As for the total number of Amiibo I used to bring about the entire Koopa clan, it involved 9 Bowser Jr.'s and 2 Bowsers. But I have every confidence that very similar results can be achieved with 7 Bowser Jr.'s.
This meatbag made a lot of mistakes.
I did, but that's part of the reason why I really want to do this show. I don't want to hide my missteps and miscalculations. I want to use them to help you avoid some of the same pitfalls.
Disclaimer time!
I don't recommend making this your first attempt at a custom Amiibo unless you're really artistic.
Or really brave. Or a glutton for punishment.
Manage your expectations. You're going to watch this turn into this in a matter of minutes when the reality is I spent upwards of 40 hours before reaching the point where I felt satisfied with the results. But there are a lot of ways you can reduce the difficulty aside from just avoiding my errors. Remember, I'm no pro, but I put in a lot of time and hopefully a lot more time than you'll have to, and I was really patient. Well, mostly.
Remember when you chucked Ludwig's hair across the room in a fit of rage like a tantruming toddler? Priceless!
Yeah, let's save that for a future episode, shall we? For now, it's all about Larry. Let's get into it. This is the most difficult custom you're going to see me attempt on the show. I wanted to challenge myself to recreate the trophy poses from Smash, and that meant a complete overhaul from top to bottom. All the Koopalings are some advanced level art action, but Larry in particular is the most involved of the series, and you'll see why in a few. That said, you can save yourself a ton of time and dramatically reduce the level of difficulty by altering the approach. If you leave the pose as is and just modify the head with a spiffy new coat of paint, it'll make the whole operation a lot more manageable. So gauge how invested you want to be in the project and determine for yourself what path will lead you to an end product that you're going to be really happy with.
Okay, let's go over all the things we need to put these things together. Let's start with the components. That includes the figures, pieces, and parts. The first thing we need obviously is a Bowser Jr. Amiibo. It's going to be our base for the figure, as well as the NFC chip we're going to use to store the Larry game data. I may borrow pieces from another Bowser Jr. figure, but if and when I do that, I will make explicit reference to it so you know exactly where it occurred, and I'll also present you with an alternate option so that you don't have to have more than one of these things. The next thing up is a Bowser Amiibo from the Smash series. And I will add, I don't feel it's necessary, but because I did use it, I'm putting it on here because I don't want you guys to feel like I'm pulling a fast one on you. The next thing up is thumbtacks and paper clips. If you've seen any other episode of the show, you know I use these a lot, but this time they're more than just tools. They're integral to the actual construction of the figure. The next piece is a white plastic spork. These prove to be extremely useful in a variety of different ways. More details later. And finally, some custom vinyl stickers. In this way, I can preserve some of the details of the eyes that I would just never be able to achieve with a brush. Let's see what tools and supplies were involved. First up, as per usual, is the round nose pliers. But I gotta say, there were many times where I needed more than just one plier. Next up, you're going to need some sculpting putty. For Larry, I used Milliput and Sculpey. Another critical component is super glue. I love super glue, but it's not a be-all end-all. I tried as often as possible to use it only as a reinforcing agent. And obviously, since all these Koopa kids have their own unique color schemes, you're going to need some paint and brushes. I would recommend having two different types on hand. One wider brush with an angled edge, and a second with a very sharp tip for fine details. And last on the list, you're going to need a reliable cutter. I used an X-Acto knife and some sandpaper. You're going to be doing a lot of sanding. There were a few other tools that I pulled out from time to time, but they played a somewhat smaller role in the process, so we'll cross those bridges when we come to them.
Plus, you only put 5 spots on here for tools, you tool.
Okay, so let's devise a battle plan. We know we're starting with the Bowser Jr. amiibo. Almost everything that we need for a Larry is here. It's just going to require some pretty heavy modification. All the amiibo from the Smash line are based on their Smash Brothers trophies, so I'm going to do everything I can to modify this Bowser Jr. to try to make it match Larry's in-game trophy. Starting at the top, it looks like Bowser Jr.'s ponytail sprouts out from the top of his head in the same place that Larry's big blue mohawk does, so I'm going to see if I could just build on top of that. Bowser Jr. is the only Koopaling who has any spikes on his head, so we'll just cut those off or shave them down. Larry doesn't have any eyebrows, and instead of those little black beady eyes, he has these really big bulging eyes. So I can shave or sand Bowser Jr.'s eyebrows and eyes off, or I could just build Larry's eyes on top of them. Bowser Jr.'s head is a lot shorter than Larry, so I'll have to see how that looks. This next feature is what makes Larry the most complex of all the Koopalings. He has an open mouth and a cleft lip. So what I imagine I have to do is remove Bowser Jr.'s lower jaw and cut out the shape of the cleft lip on the top. Where the back is concerned, the shell is great, so that's just going to involve some repainting. Even though the amiibo looks great and it's one of my favorite, but upon close inspection you can see there's a number of ways that details were compromised, presumably to streamline the production process. But the amiibo figure is cut off just below the upper rim, so I think I'm going to do that same thing and only build the figure as deep as the clown car. You can also see on the Bowser Jr. trophy that he does have the reverse of his shell on the front of his torso, but when we remove the bib from the figure, that feature isn't there. Here's the one spot where Larry's going to cut us a break. He's the only one of the Koopalings whose abdominal section is obscured, so that's not going to be something we need to fabricate. The position of the arms does present a little bit of a challenge. For Bowser Jr.'s right arm, I have a feeling we could just remove it and flip it upside down, and that should align the arm rather nicely. However, Bowser Jr. is making a fist, and Larry's gripping the rim of the clown car, so we're gonna have to find some way to open up that hand or replace it. For the left arm, Larry's hand is closed, with the exception of one pointing finger, and the arm is semi-outstretched. So what I'm gonna attempt to do is remove the arm, score it at the elbow crease, straighten it out, and then patch it with a little bit of Milliput. For the fingers, well, we're gonna have to figure that out. Like all the Koopalings except Wendy, Bowser Jr. does have these black bracers, but all the other Koopa boys sport spikes on there, so we're gonna have to add those. Larry presents us with another obstacle in the form of a third exposed limb. He's got a leg hanging over that side, and Bowser Jr. doesn't have any component that we can use to create that. So that means we're either going to have to sculpt it or come up with an alternative resource to fit that in. While Bowser Jr.'s body is inclined forward, Larry's practically sitting on his stomach, so we'll have to find a way to reposition him in a way to create a more dramatic angle with his body. Now on to the clown car! Bowser Jr.'s clown car is unique from the 7 Koopalings in 3 distinct ways. The most obvious one is color, which is true of all of them. The upper ring and the propeller at the bottom is special to each Koopaling, but whereas Bowser Jr.'s has black eyes with a smooth surface, all of the Koopalings have these glowing, yellowish, ridged, headlight looking things with a series of small black vertical dots. So we're definitely going to have to address that. The easy thing would just be repainting Bowser Jr.'s eyes to match the color of the Koopalings and drawing some vertical lines on there, and I would not discourage you from doing that, but I'm going to see if there's not some way I can achieve a ridge surface. So I'm going to remove Bowser Jr.'s and replace them all together. And finally, there's the angle of the clown car itself. While I find it tremendously tempting to just leave well enough alone, I've made a commitment to trying to match the trophy, and that means changing the angle. So that for sure means I'm going to need to patch up the hole where Bowser Jr.'s car attaches to the base, and find some secure way to reattach it in the position that I need it to be to match the angle of the in-game trophy. And then, obviously, we're gonna have to repaint everything. I hope you're ready. Here we go! First thing we gotta do is prep this figure for complete disassembly. I'm gonna throw it right into the boiling water. No need to worry about the NFC chip, it'll be just fine. Leave it in for 30 seconds to a minute, then pull it out and pull it apart. I've probably completely dismantled about a dozen Bowser Jr.'s now, and I can tell you some came apart really easily. And others were so stubborn I had to go back into the boiling water a few times, so don't be afraid to do that if you need to. Keep in mind, if you don't mind Larry in the same pose as Bowser Jr., all you have to do is pop off his head, and you can leave the rest intact. I'm gonna start with Larry's most defining feature, which is that big blue mohawk. I want to make it out of Milliput, but I needed to pick it up and put it down multiple times, so the Sculpey wound up being the way to go for me. I used Bowser Jr.'s ponytail as the base, but I did need to trim off the sides to narrow it up a bit, and then I'm just going to build on top of it using it as the bottom spike on the mohawk. I can see that Larry has what looks to be depressions in the mohawk, but I'm not going to address that at the sculpting level. I think that's something I might try to suggest with paint. I don't mind telling you, it took me 3 or 4 tries to finally come up with the mohawk that I was happy with. At first I tried just making a block chunk and cutting out pieces, but I wasn't liking how it looked, so what I ultimately did was made a series of pointed cylinders fingers and then just smooth them all together. Now if you use the Milliput, all you gotta do is set it aside for a little while and it'll dry all on its own, but because I use the Sculpey, you gotta take it to the oven for 15 minutes at 275 degrees. It's not going to hurt your figure in any way, but a good practice is to center it in the oven. Don't put it too close to the top or the sides, so it can bake evenly.
And only use a microwave oven if you want to fail horribly.
I was hoping I could keep the upper portion of Bowser Jr.'s head intact and just build Larry's eyes on top of it, but as I was playing around with the proportions, I discovered there really isn't enough real estate to get the eyes the way that I need without them dramatically sloping back. So I had to remove the ponytail to build up the top of Larry's head with some Milliput. I sculpted Larry's eyes out of some Milliput. To try to make them as even as I could, I made one ball that I cut in half, and then I applied it directly to the head. Then I stuck the ponytail back in where I wanted it to be and smoothed it all out with some water. I thought it would be a lot harder than it was, but the Milliput was great. Most of the time I just used my fingers, but if you find you need to get something into a small groove, just use a toothpick and that should set you right up. I worked with Milliput a lot in the Koopaling project, so here's a couple tips I learned to make it a little bit more manageable. It's a two-part epoxy, so once you mix it together, it's a little bit tacky. I found if I set it aside for about 5 minutes before I start trying to mold it into any shape, a lot less of it sticks to my fingers. It has a firmer, more manageable consistency, and it's a little bit more forgiving. That said, you don't want to wait too long, because after about 20 minutes it becomes a lot less workable. Have some water nearby and make liberal use of it. It helps to make things really smooth, and it will prevent it from clinging too much to your hands. It is a bit of a double-edged sword though, because while it doesn't require any baking, and your end result is going to be way stronger than anything you could produce with Sculpey, it's going to be a little while before you can get back to work. Depending on the size of what you sculpt, 2 or 3 hours may not even be enough. Bowser Jr.'s mouth area is what really makes Larry the most difficult of all the Koopalings. Because while he's not the only one that has an open mouth, and he's not the only one who has a cleft lip, he is the only one that has both. And that for me was one of the most time-consuming aspects of this figure to get right. I used the X-Acto knife to cut along the line of Bowser Jr.'s mouth. I thought I could just hinge it open, but it did require that I removed it entirely. Then I also used the X-Acto knife to carve the cleft into his lip. To make this process a little bit easier, not to mention safer, I used a heavy work glove on my non-dominant hand, so I could reduce the risk of using the X-Acto knife so close to my own fingers. While I was really careful and I didn't take off any more than I needed to, if you do, don't worry, it's not the end of the world. You can always build it back up with some Milliput. Once I carved the general shape, the long and arduous task of sanding begins. And you're going to find this is a reoccurring theme for the entire 7-part Koopaling series. Once I was happy with the shape of the upper lip, I used my Milliput to reconnect them and sanded it smooth. We've got a complete repositioning on our hands, so I'm going to cut Bowser Jr.'s arms off, as well as his hands. For the left arm, I was hoping I could just score it and stretch it out, and while you might be able to make that work, I decided to just cut it off completely and rotate it until it looked like the arm was more extended. Bowser Jr.'s left hand is already open, but his wrist is bent back and I need to straighten that out, so I'm going to change the angle of it, hit it with some super glue, and address the position of his fingers. I'm going to very carefully cut between each finger with the X-Acto knife, and then I got to go back to the boiling water because I'm going to need it to be really flexible. Immediately upon removing it from the boiling water, I'm going to douse it in some ice water. The rapid cooling will help the plastic to set where I want it to be. This is also a great technique if you want to straighten a bent sword.
I'm looking at you, Marth.
Now while the rapid cool definitely does help, chances are it's not going to completely solve the problem. I'm going to put a dab of super glue under the fingers and the thumb and fold them down against the palm of the hand. You're probably going to want to use your pliers for this one. It's a little easier on your hand,
And it will keep you from permanently gluing your fingers together.
I committed very heavily to using as much plastic as possible on this project, so I found myself preserving a lot of Bowser Jr. components that it probably would have been easier to just resculpt. I spent a lot of time reorienting and repositioning his left arm, but the shapes of these limbs are super simple. There's nobody out there who can't sculpt a cylinder, so if you're inclined, you can save on the sanding and go right to building your own limbs. For Bowser Jr.'s right arm, it's already bent into the position that I want it to be. All I have to do is turn it upside down, but his right hand is a fist, and I don't really see any way of being able to open that up. So I'm gonna discard that hand and borrow another left hand from one of my other Bowser Jr. amiibo figures. I'm gonna cut off the thumb and glue it to the opposite side of his hand. Now if your intention is to make the entire set of Koopalings, there's a chance you are gonna have an extra left hand, but I would discourage you against buying another Bowser Jr. figure just to pilfer that hand. We can sculpt this pretty easily by just making a pancake, adding a few incisions, and bending them into shape. For Larry's exposed back leg, I happen to have had a Burger King Creepy Classics Bart Simpson figure, and I don't know what really possessed me to think that this would be a good idea. Maybe because I was trying to prevent myself from having an extra thing to sculpt, but I removed the back leg, and I wound up shaving it down with an X-Acto knife. Once it had more or less the proportions of Larry's leg, I sanded it, and sanded it,
And sanded it.
It was a lot of work and it took a lot of time to do what would have been much easier to just sculpt anyway. I didn't include this figure on the components list because, honestly, it wasn't really a very good match and it took a lot of manipulating to do what could have been much more easily done by just sculpting the leg out. Again, we just make a little cylinder and add a couple incisions and boom. Even though Larry's position is completely different than Bowser Jr.'s, I still think I can use the base of Bowser Jr. to build up on, but I am going to have to take it down a little bit. So I cut off the sides, and then I'm going to use my thumbtack to poke some holes in it that I can plug with paper clips to use as armatures. You guys may notice that I use paper clips for repositioning a lot. What I find really appealing about them is they provide the perfect combination of durability and flexibility. so they allow me to adjust the position as I go. I glue all of my plastic components to the paperclip skeleton. I test it multiple times against the clown car to make sure the hands and legs align where I need them to be, and then I'm going to fill in the gaps with Milliput. I didn't think I would need the shell at this point, but I found that it was necessary so that I can make sure that I wasn't going to have any conflicts with the positioning of the shell against the back of the clown car and his head. For Larry's bracer spikes, I'm just going to nick them right off of one of my Bowser amiibo, but I wouldn't buy another figure just for this. It's really just a little half circle, anybody can sculpt that. Now that my body and my head were more or less positioned, I began the tremendously time-consuming task of sanding it down. The next step was to prime it. Because most of the colors used on this are light, I'm going to use a light gray. It's sometimes difficult to see areas where maybe the sanding was a little bit lacking until you prime it. So at this point, if there's any angled edges or something isn't looking quite right, don't be shy about tackling it with some more sandpaper, because this might be the last chance you get to smooth it out. Now that I'm primed and I'm ready to start painting, we're presented with the issue of interpreting color. If I look at the Smash trophies, Bowser Jr. and all the Koopalings with the exception of Morton have the same yellowish brown skin tone. But if you look at the Bowser Jr. figure, it's a pretty flat yellow. So I made the decision that it was more important to me that the Koopalings matched Bowser Jr. than that they were precisely accurate to what I saw on the screen. The other thing you may notice is that Bowser Jr. has very little paint on him. Most of his pieces are molded the color that they are, including his yellow. Here's where I burned a lot of time. I could not for the life of me find a yellow paint that was giving me the kind of coverage that I wanted. I tried 4 or 5 different brands, including my go-to Vallejo model color, and honestly, none of them were cutting the mustard. So if you have a favorite yellow paint brand, let us know. I must have done like 6 or 7 coats and I was not happy with how they were turning out. So then it brought me back to Bowser Jr. There's a reason why Nintendo molded him out of this yellow plastic. It's because 95% of him is this yellow color. Instead of priming it gray and painting it yellow, I'll just prime it yellow. So I brought Bowser Jr. into my local hardware store and did a color match with a flat yellow. There are a number of advantages of doing it this way. The first being it's a lot faster. It's going to save you a lot of time to be able to spray that paint on versus having to cover so much of this figure with a brush. And perhaps more appealing, the great thing about spray paint and airbrushes is you have no brush strokes. So the result is a really smooth, clean looking finish. I'm really happy to report that this particular spray paint was not only a great color match, but it made a great primer as well because it's a surface that was really willing to accept paint. Now some quick advice about spray painting: try to stay at least 7 or 8 inches away from whatever object you're painting, otherwise it's probably going to pool and drip. And also, before you hit your figure, make sure you fire the first couple shots off on a napkin or something. If you got dried paint clogging the nozzle, it's gonna splatter everywhere. Now that I've finally got this yellow issue reconciled, we can address the rest of the painting process. Take it away, boys. Thin your paints! I'm sure you guys have heard before that thinning your paints is really important, but maybe you don't know why. When your paint is thin, it allows you to preserve some of the fine details of your figures by not filling in the grooves and crevices. It's also probably the most effective way of avoiding having these really heavy, noticeable brush strokes. Now here's why I think we don't thin our paints. Because it takes a lot longer. We're tempted to hit it heavy because of the instant gratification we get from that dramatic color change. But if you want your finish to be smooth, you're probably going to have to thin it out with some water, and depending on what you're painting, you may have to do 2 or 3 coats. That's also why priming is useful, because it gives your thin paint something to stick to. For spikes, I'm going to use a flesh tone. You could add a little yellow to that if you want. I'm going to use a blue for the rings around his shell spikes. Each Koopaling has their own little color theme, and for Larry, it's this cyan sky blue tone. I'm going to use a Vallejo model color sky blue paint for his hair and the base of his shell. Because I'm using Bowser Jr. as my color match sample, I can see that his mouth area is kind of a yellowish color too, but it's noticeably lighter than his body. Because I want to make sure that there's some contrast between Larry's body and his mouth, I'm going to use a wheat color. So it's kind of like meeting in the middle between a flesh tone and a yellow. I'm going white for his eyes and the outer rim of his shell, as well as the tips of his nails. I'll make his bracers black and touch up the spikes with a dab of silver. For the inside of his mouth, I'm going to use the Vallejo red, which dries a little dark, so it's comparable to what the inside of Big Bowser's mouth looks like. For Larry's teeth, I wanted them to be really smooth with a glossy finish, so what I decided on was a white plastic spork. I just clip off the ends to the length that I want and glue them into place. Larry also sports a blue star tattoo, or birthmark maybe, on the side of his head. I drew the shape out with a blue marker and then filled it in with some blue paint. I wanted to preserve as much of the detail of Larry's eyes as I could, and I just didn't trust myself enough to be able to paint it on there to my satisfaction. So I drew his iris, pupils, and highlight in Adobe Illustrator, and I had them printed out on a custom vinyl bumper sticker. So all I needed to do was cut them out and stick them into position. Time for some clowning around! The clown car is its own separate challenge altogether. I removed the clear plastic stand from the base, but you may decide you don't need to. But what I do need to do is fill in the hole where Bowser Jr.'s clown car connected to the stand. For that, I'm just going to use some Milliput and then sand it down. I also removed the propeller because that's going to make it a lot easier at the painting stage. Where the eyes are concerned, I was desperate to not have to sculpt these things. I was trying to think of anything I could use, like furniture tacks, Dots candy.
Haha, you moron!
I even went so far as to try to make my own mold, but after several hours of trying to avoid doing it, I ultimately wound up just sculpting them anyway. I made 2 little balls out of Milliput, stuck them to the surface of the clown car, and added the grooves using the back of an X-Acto knife. So here's my advice on that. If you can be happy with it by just painting the eyes and drawing some vertical lines, do that. But if you need to go that extra mile, you know how I did it. And if you come up with a better way, please let me know. I was obviously going to need to come up with some kind of paint solution because of my patched hole, and I was going to have to remove the orange dots. So I decided rather than trying to do a spot conceal, I would just repaint the entire thing. I knew I wanted it to be really smooth and totally free of brush strokes, so spray paint was always the plan. But I wasn't sure if the answer was a gloss white or a pearl. Bowser Jr.'s clown car isn't exactly white, but it is glossy, and it does have some slight pearlescent qualities. So I tested it out a little bit on upside down yogurt containers, and it turns out the answer was both. First I primed him with my gray primer, and then I used some painter's tape to mask the upper rim. I didn't worry about masking the mouth because I thought it would be easier and less time consuming to repaint it than it would be to try to mask it out with tape, and I totally stand by that decision. First I hit these clowns with some gloss white, and once it was dry, I hit them again with the pearl. And this was just another example of what a multi-step process this custom figure is. So if you're under the delusion that you're going to be able to do this in an afternoon, think again. At several junctures, there's going to be some imposed roadblocks that prevent you from moving forward, like waiting for Milliput to harden or waiting for paint to dry, so don't feel like you have to rush it. Take your time and get it right. For the eyes on the clown car, I mixed a yellowish orange paint, but I was not loving it. So I thought about the kind of finish that I wanted, and what I settled on was nail polish. It has really good coverage and a great glossy sheen that kind of gave it that glowing look that I was going for. Now I'm not going to kid you, I've never worked with nail polish before, so straight out of the bottle I spilt it all over one of my clown cars, which was really frustrating because it meant I had to repaint it, which meant I had to do all that masking that I didn't want to have to do. Wow! So what I did was I passed that part of the project off to my wife, who has a lot more experience at painting nails, and she did an amazing job. So my mistake was I treated it like paint, and it does not behave like paint. So if you've never used it before, I would recommend testing it out before you just slap it on your clown car.
Like you would have done if you had half a brain.
I finished the propeller and the rim with the same sky blue. For the vertical black dots on either side of the clown car's eyes, I didn't think that I could paint something so tiny and maintain the consistent uniformity that it required, so I used a fine tip, permanent, indelible black marker to just dot them on. When it came to reattaching the clown car to the base, it was a job I didn't want to trust to super glue alone. I'm not saying using super glue alone is insufficient. All I'm saying is after all that hard work, I don't want to risk it. So I'm going to reinforce it with a clear thumbtack. I'll measure it out so that the plastic portion of the thumbtack stands at the same height as the clear plastic base. The size is perfect to wedge snugly between the plastic. Once I determine what the length of the thumbtack needs to be, I'll clip the end off, and then I'll hit it with some super glue to lock it in. I'm going to test out my clown car to make sure I've got it at the exact pitch that I want it to be to try to match the angle of the Smash Brothers trophy. And then once I figure out where I want it to be, I'm going to depress the clown car onto the tack enough to leave a mark. If you try to just straight up push the clown car down onto the tack, you're going to have a really hard time. So for this, I turn to a drill.
Power tools.
If you're too young to operate power tools, be sure to ask a grown-up for assistance.
What, are we their moms? Why don't you tell them not to eat Play-Doh while you're at it? Sheesh.
I'll reinforce all the edges with a healthy spot of super glue, and at long last, Larry Koopa joins the battle.
Well, we survived. Now let's see what this Koopa Kid looks like in the box. If you like this box art, feel free to download it from a link in the description. For a lot of people, the most intimidating aspect of tackling a custom is the detailed precision required for the eyes. So if you're like me and not an especially gifted painter, vinyl stickers are a great alternative. I spent a lot of time drawing and measuring the Koopaling eyes I used in Adobe Illustrator, and I want to save you the trouble, so I'm making them available to you. Find the link in the description. Hope they help. I've got more great customs to show you from our players at home. Thanks to everyone who shared their awesome art, and remember, if you want your custom featured here on Custom Conquest, tweet me at Custom Conquest, and don't forget the hashtag MyCCAmiibo. The Bowser Jr. Amiibo released as a Toys R Us exclusive, and it wasn't super easy to get a hold of so many. So I want to thank my mom for dragging my dad to Toys R Us first thing in the morning on release day to wait in line to buy toys for her 30-something son's YouTube show.
Thanks, Mom.
Haha, Dad, she got you again.
And thanks to you for joining me on this quest. Plenty more custom Koopalings ahead. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for playing.
Dark Side out. Time to go post some Koopaling pics on Reddit so our amiibo can tell TJ how much he sucks. Heh, I love the internet.